and health impact of energy generation. Learning objectives. Hold on, let me get out of this thing. There we go. Learning objectives, 2 chemicals that contribute to adverse health effects when they're released through burning of fossil fuels, 3 health problems linked to poor outdoor air quality, and 2 strategies to reduce fossil fuel reliance. Okay, so first is just United States electricity generation by energy source. As you can see, natural gas is the top one, coal is next, nuclear, hydropower, wind and solar, other renewables. Renewables are a very small portion at this point. Until a few years ago, coal was actually ahead of natural gas. During some of the transition away from coal, we've moved predominantly to natural gas with some renewables mixed in, but not near enough, and we'll get to why. So fossil fuel use in Michigan, as of 2019, Michigan used about 32% of its electricity generation was used with coal. It was more than 50% in 2014. So as you can see, we are shutting down coal plants slowly. But during that same time period, natural gas power plants nearly doubled. And at the end of 2019, natural gas provided more than 30% of the state's electricity generation. Nuclear is still about 28%. That's really not going to change anytime soon. They're not building new nuclear right now. It's just not cost effective. Plus, there are other issues with that. But we're not going to get into nuclear at all. But renewables sat still only at 10%. Largely, we got to the 10% because of a law that was passed in 2008. And later in the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about the law that went through in 2016 and how that's impacting things a little bit. So this is just a map of all of the fossil fuel plants in Michigan and surrounding states. You can see there's quite an abundance of them still. Just some photos of fossil fuel life cycle. If anyone tells you that anything about them is clean, they don't look that way to me, and they clearly aren't. So there are several harmful air pollutants that come from the use of burning fossil fuels. Pollutants include acid gases, benzene, dioxin, formaldehyde, lead, arsenic, mercury, and then radium and uranium. All of these pollutants can be associated with various health impacts, and we'll talk a little bit more about those later. But asthma, COPD, heart attacks and strokes, there's also neurological things. So it's not just the cardiovascular, but you certainly see that as a major problem exacerbated by the air pollutants. So this is just a photo of particulate matter 2.5, just to give you an example of sort of how small it really is and how easily it can get into your bronchial system as you're breathing, because it's just so tiny. So particles get very deep into the airways, causing inflammation, impact throughout the body. Susceptible individuals are, those that we always see are susceptible to environmental hazards. So children, elderly populations, those with pre-existing conditions. Then there's ozone. So you can see through this photo some of the ground level ozone formation and how it happens. So created from VOC and nitrogen oxide plus the sun, it causes essentially what we refer to as sunburn in the lungs. So again, can contribute to a whole variety of breathing issues, as well as low birth weight, asthma exacerbations, lung size reduction. This article, you don't need to look at all of it, but just the middle shows the ozone scores for several of the Michigan counties with federal air monitoring. And so you'll see that ozone levels are contributing to premature deaths, all sorts of illnesses, and days lost in productivity and ability to work. Mercury is another chemical that gets into the air and then also into our water from the burning of fossil fuels. Coal plants and water. In 2016, Michigan coal plants were discharging 48,697 pounds of toxic pollutants, also creating coal ash, which contains mercury, arsenic, lead, and other toxic heavy metals. Michigan's 13 largest coal plants have generated more than 1.4 million tons of coal ash waste in 2016. It's gone down a little bit, but our largest coal plants are still operational. Again, with water, there are now 29 coal ash waste sites in Michigan, most of them unlined. Groundwater has been contaminated with toxic chemicals above what drinking water standards are. And 2.7 million Americans live within 3 miles of a coal plant. Those people who are closest, obviously the frontline communities are most impacted. So natural gas. So you'll hear a lot, and I'm sure you've heard a lot over the last few years about how natural gas is the bridge fuel, how it's so much cleaner, and it's a great way for us to meet our electricity demand while phasing out coal plants. And while natural gas has become a bridge fuel, what we're trying to do is stop it from becoming the fuel of choice for 30 years to come. It's not like you can build a gas plant, have it run for a couple of years while you build up all the renewables. When the utilities put a gas plant online, they're planning for the next 30 to 50 years on depending on that natural gas. So as of June 2019, gas was 30% of primary energy consumption. And yes, while natural gas does produce less carbon dioxide than the coal plants, it still exudes a whole lot more methane gas and emissions, especially through extraction. And so natural gas can actually end up being worse as far as its contribution to climate change. So a little bit more about methane versus carbon dioxide. Methane, lifespan is 12 years, which CO2 is definitely longer, but methane is 30 times more potent, so it traps heat faster. So every time we go to extract natural gas, we are putting more gas into the air that will contribute to global warming, climate change. So Michigan has the largest natural gas storage capacity in the nation, 1.1 trillion cubic feet. Michigan is using more than it's producing, and we're in the top 5 for residential natural gas use. So again, as we look at transitioning away from coal, we're seeing more and more natural gas, and you'll start to hear a lot more about how we need to electrify everything, which I know sounds sort of strange when we've been talking about how energy generation, has contributed to all of this pollution. But now there's sort of a move, as we build more renewables and invest more in energy efficiency, moving to all electric rather than use of gas is going to be really critical. So just as a tip, next time you're looking to buy a new stove, avoid a gas stove. I know they're great for cooking, but there's some evidence that induction cooktops are just as good, and you will actually help eliminate our dependence on natural gas. So air pollution and health. So like I said, air pollution does impact the brain. It's not just the lungs and heart. So air pollution can have impact that lead to strokes, loss of intellectual capacity, largely because of all of the chemicals, and Alzheimer's and dementia. Respiratory health is obviously the biggest one. all of the pollution can lead to asthma, COPD, lung cancer, reduced lung function, and these are usually what gets measured the most when talking about air pollution. So heart disease, arrhythmias, congestive heart failure. So all of these things are a result of the burning of fossil fuels. Global air pollution has been sort of measured to contribute to 4.2 million deaths a year. This is just due to outdoor air pollution. When I'm talking a little bit more about energy efficiency, I'm going to talk a little bit about indoor air pollution too. But the combination of outdoor and indoor air pollution can lead to 7 million premature deaths a year. 1 in 9 total global deaths from exposure to indoor and outdoor air pollution. Like I said, we'll get into some of the indoor air a little bit when I'm talking about policies. So again, who's most at risk from the pollutants from burning fossil fuels? All of the people that we see are vulnerable to all of these different environmental hazards. In Michigan, air pollution, 1.8 million Michiganders are still living in areas that have unacceptable levels of particulate matter, 2.5. Most of the old coal plants are actually generally almost always in what's called non-attainment according to EPA standards. So even with the pollution controls that they've done, they're still always in some kind of violation. Enforcement of that has obviously gone down under this current administration, and as well as some of the standards being rolled back. But 275 people die, 648 for serious illness each year from the exposure to particulate matter. Michigan now is 5th in the nation in premature deaths and hospital admissions attributed to coal-fired power plants. Again, we're still pretty dependent on coal. And as we try and transition, we're really trying to push the utilities to get out of their coal plants earlier. We're having some success with certain utilities and a little less with some of the others. Again, we'll get into that when we look at some of the policies. So, what does this mean? All of these hospital visits and serious illnesses cost to Michiganders more than $15 billion a year. So this chart just shows some of the different impacts and how many cases we're seeing a year that are related to air pollutant emissions, and sort of what we could be really saving if we got rid of the coal plants and then the natural gas as well. As far as the air pollution, we wouldn't see so much loss of productivity. We wouldn't see so many people missing school and therefore their parents missing work, and we wouldn't see all the hospital visits. So can't really talk about this without talking about climate change as well. And I know when we get to 201, we'll talk more broadly about climate change and health impacts. But fossil fuel combustion, leading contributor. Coal has the highest carbon content, but leaking methane from natural gas is another contributor. Total US greenhouse gas emissions, and I don't have them more updated, so this is the 2016. It's changed a little bit. Transportation is now actually over a third. Electricity has gone down just a little bit, industry has gone down just a little bit, but that's being then, that moves up transportation. So again, when we start talking about electrification of everything, that includes the transportation sector. We need to move to electric vehicles, but powered by renewable energy. So I think you all pretty much know what climate change is. But warming temperatures due to burning fossil fuels, blanket of greenhouse gas, and our surface temperatures keep warming, leading to all these different impacts on rising sea levels, loss of biodiversity, extreme weather events, which we are definitely seeing. So that decreases the air quality, certainly, again, exacerbating health impacts as far as being able to breathe. increased flooding, superstorms, certainly damage we've seen along coastlines, extreme heat and extreme cold, which people are susceptible to, especially vulnerable populations. And again, we get into energy efficiency and some of the housing issues. This is going to be an important thing. And then there's psychological damage, and we've seen really people starting to worry, and it impacts their day-to-day lives just in terms of the worry and anxiety. Obviously, with what's going on right now, that's exacerbated, but those who are most susceptible to climate change are also most susceptible to the virus that's going around. So increasing anxiety over the long term. Impacts we've already seen in Michigan. We've seen higher temperatures and extreme heat. We've seen the super storms in the winter. Allergy season is extended. Lower lake levels and now higher lake levels. Agricultural difficulties. Michigan has a huge amount invested in agriculture, and we're losing crops just like all over every year. It's causing problems for our agriculture. And then sudden large amounts of rain and flooding. So solutions, because there actually are some. First is renewable energy. So like I said, replacing the coal-fired power plants, replacing natural gas with renewables, wind, solar, geothermal, wind and solar being what we most concentrate on. The Michigan Public Service Commission, which is the regulatory commission that deals with the various utilities. To different extents, there are large regulated utilities like DTE and Consumers Energy. There are also cooperative and municipal utilities. The Public Service Commission has less control over those, but there are certain things within the law that they still have some say over. But according to the Public Service Commission, it's already cheaper to invest in renewable energy than building a new coal plant. That's been true actually for a few years. Right now, natural gas prices are still very low, but the comparability in price keeps going down for renewables. And while renewables cost what they cost, the price of natural gas is extremely volatile. So just because it's cheap for us now doesn't mean it will be in 5-10 years. And like I said before, if we keep building natural gas plants, we get locked in. So if Michigan were to produce about 25% of our energy from renewable sources by 2030, we could actually reduce health damages by more than $1 billion per year. Energy efficiency is the second solution. Energy efficiency is basically, you've seen all the things about the changeovers in light bulbs, but it's basically reducing the demand. So by making alterations to buildings, we actually reduce the need to generate electricity, meaning we don't need to have the fossil fuel plants burning as much. The cheapest energy is, in fact, the energy that we don't use at all. So the more efficient homes and buildings, the less pressure there is on the grid, and that means that we don't have to build new power generating plants, which also buys up time as the cost of renewables keeps going down and the storage capacity for batteries keeps going up. The technology is improving daily. And so it's moving very fast. So the more we can invest now in energy efficiency, getting our buildings in good shape, the longer we can take to have to build any kind of new generation, that gives us some time. So examples, of light bulbs are an example, sealing windows, updating furnace, insulation is a big one. In addition to just reducing the need for electricity generation, it's also a good investment. Customers who invest in energy efficiency end up avoiding 4.35, I think it's a little higher now, for every dollar invested. So there are actually policies around energy efficiency that can help. Right now, Michigan actually requires that the utilities invest in 1.5%. There's a requirement for 1% per year of their capacity to be invested in energy efficiency, with incentives to go up to 1.5. I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that have happened recently where the commission has now recommended or is close to mandating 2%. And so, investing in energy, or passing energy efficiency policies can improve quality of life. This is where the indoor air quality comes into play. Obviously, we're all at risk from the pollutants in the outdoor air, but outdoor air is still actually cleaner than indoor air. So this is especially important right now when we're all kind of stuck in our homes. Investments in energy efficiency can make your home, first of all, more insulated, so you're more comfortable and safer against the extreme heat and extreme cold. Also can improve air quality and with filtration, eliminating different leaks from roof leaks or water problems. Making a house energy efficiency can definitely reduce the need to go to the doctor for different exacerbations of asthma and other issues. So here are some of just the main pieces that happen with an energy efficiency measures. So it's insulation, air sealing, improved heating systems, improved cooking systems, again, avoid gas stoves, and improved ventilation. So getting particulate matter out of your indoor air, reducing mold, reducing dampness, making the home more comfortable. And this also goes for office buildings and any industrial building as well, but it's particularly important in your home where we spend most of our time now, all of our time. So I left a slide on here, federal mitigation efforts from a few years ago. I have no slides following the federal mitigation efforts because right now there aren't any. So I hope that at some point we will be able to put some more information back. The current administration has rolled back all of the efforts that the Obama administration had put into place. There was something called the Clean Power Plan, which was supposed to significantly reduce emissions from all existing coal-fired power plants. That has all been rolled back, along with so many other environmental regulations. So while the federal government fails to do anything, states are actually taking the lead. So with state energy policies, there's actually been a lot that's happened in the last few years. In 2016, we passed, and Ecology Center worked quite a bit on this, Public Acts 341 and 342. I said that the utilities got to the 10% renewable energy because of a law that had passed in 2008. That sunsetted in 2015. We had been working on it at least since 2012, and then finally passed a new comprehensive energy law in 2016. So what that law did is it required electric providers to increase to 15% renewable energy by 2021. They're on track, and I think they're going to make the 15%, but as you can see, that expires in 2021. So every few years, we have to put some new energy into at least updating these standards. And so, while that's not the focus in the legislature right now, it's certainly going to be something we're looking at over the next year because we want to increase that renewable energy standard so that utilities don't stop. The other big thing in the law is it required, I said, the energy efficiency or energy waste reduction programs of 1% per year with incentives for up to 1.5. And the biggest thing is it required the regulated utilities. So that DTE, Consumers Energy, Indiana Michigan Power, UPCO, which is the UP, to engage in integrated resource plan processes and to submit plans every 5 years. And I'll get into the integrated resource plan in a couple of minutes. So also some standalone policies. So while we're not trying to do the whole overhaul of the energy law right now, like I said, that's probably coming no later this year, probably now 2021. There have been packages of bills around solar access and distributed generation, making it easier for people to put solar on their homes and businesses. There's some tax policies around that as well, making sure that people don't get nicked in their property taxes for putting solar on their homes. There's new energy financing policies to let people make investments in larger energy efficiency measures as well as renewables. Health and safety fund, that's something I'm doing a lot of work on right now, and I'll get to that too. Expansion of shut-off protection, that's, as I mentioned in the introduction this morning, that's a really critical piece that is important for while we're dealing with COVID, as well as broader shut-off protection. Medicaid coding is an interesting one, trying to actually allow for some of these energy efficiency and weatherization measures in homes to actually qualify under Medicaid codes. So that the health impacts can actually be realized and paid for. And then transportation policies that advance electrification, and then coordination of a lot of these policies is a really critical thing too. A lot of times, the different sectors aren't coordinating, aren't working together. If you walk into a home that has lead problems or asbestos problems, there are also probably air quality issues and mold issues or pest issues, and those all need to be addressed. Okay, so I already said what the Michigan Public Service Commission is. So I want to talk a little bit about what the integrated resource plans actually mean. So the law that was passed in 2016 required the regulated utilities to file integrated resource plans starting in 2019 and then every year thereafter. Within the integrated resource plan, they have to include modeling and forecasts, scenarios, risk, and basically they have to set out how they're going to meet demand and through what source of energy generation over the next 5 years. But then they also include sort of some long-range planning as well. And so Consumers was the first major utility to file its integrated resource plan. And they actually took a somewhat aggressive stance on shutting down their coal plants early and moving to more renewables. There's still some issues around utility scale and utility-owned renewables versus distributed generation, which we're continuing to fight out in several cases, but not the integrated resource plan. And Consumers is already starting to put together work groups for its next integrated resource plan. The DTE integrated resource plan has been reviewed over most of 2019. This has actually been a really exciting thing because I know when I talk about Public Service Commission and IRP, people's eyes glaze over. And it's really complex and really wonky, and it's something that most people have not really paid attention to or been engaged in until this past year. And for the first time ever, there's been a huge movement. We've been a partner Catherine, who you heard from on the food, has been a huge activist with something called Work for Me DTE. And we've been able to generate, with all of our partners and largely with Work for Me DTE campaign, thousands of comments to the Public Service Commission. Also, they held a public hearing for the first time on something like this. And a couple hundred people came out. So this is the first time there's been real activism within the Public Service Commission. It for years had been more just of a rubber stamp for utilities, but that has changed. And the way we know that it has changed is in March, the commission actually fundamentally, they didn't officially reject DTE's plan. DTE's plan was really bad. They were depending almost entirely on natural gas. They were slow to close their coal plants. They weren't really making good investments in energy efficiency, and definitely not in renewables. And they were especially hostile to solar. We, as the Ecology Center, actually intervened as a party in the case, and along with several other partners, and then worked with all these other groups who were generating public interest. And the commission actually told DTE they have to make a whole bunch of changes. And the changes are so significant that the 30 days that they were given to make those changes pretty much going to be impossible. So even though the commission didn't officially reject the plan, it's pretty close to rejection. It's likely now that DTE will ask for an extension to make those changes. They probably would have been granted that anyway, but given the crisis, I'm sure they will be granted some extension. There are some flaws in the law, so DTE could actually operate without an integrated resource plan over the next 5 years until the next filing, but that presents some complications for them too, including getting some of their cost returns. A really exciting thing that happened out of this case is the Michigan Environmental Protection Act has never been applied to utility cases or anything within the Public Service Commission. And so this is the first time the commission actually said, no, that NEPA does apply, which means that they could at least peripherally take into consideration environmental harms from this plan, as well as health impacts. We've been trying to work with the commission to get them to consider health impacts for a long time, but the law doesn't spell it out explicitly, so they haven't been able to. But actually acknowledging that NEPA applies has made a huge difference in that. So now it's one of the factors they can at least look at a little bit. Other things we've been doing, and cases again before the MPSC, are energy waste reduction plans. I've been very involved in these for the last several months, and actually consumers and DTE both settled their energy waste reduction plan cases in March. So the important thing that came out of that, we were focused specifically on low-income customers and energy efficiency or energy waste reduction in those communities. We were able to get significant spending amounts raised for low-income programs and have worked quite a bit to influence pilot programs. Specifically, there's one targeting people who are in arrears and how to get them energy efficiency. This is another issue where things are not always coordinated. The people collecting the bills and charging customers, the arrears will go and try and collect the money, but they won't ever refer them over to the energy efficiency programs. And so this is a way to actually connect those, so that if you are going into arrears or in danger of being shut off, you actually are connected with the energy efficiency programs, so that maybe you can reduce the amount of energy you're using in your home. Another pilot, and I'll get into this after I talk a little bit about the work group. So in 2018, a low-income energy waste reduction work group was created. And this is actually a really pretty amazing collaboration where we've got utilities, environmental advocates, energy contractors, social service organizations, all actually working together, trying to figure out what needs to be done to actually reduce energy poverty and improve energy efficiency in low-income homes. One of the biggest issues, and from the settlement that I mentioned a minute ago, we actually have been able to get a pilot to address health, safety, and walkaway issues. It's been a big focus of the work group, but in these energy plans, there's now going to be a pilot program which we're going to be working on helping design. What the health and safety issues are, essentially, if you go into a home to do some energy efficiency, like put in insulation, the utilities are running into all sorts of issues that require walking away or deferring doing the energy efficiency measures, such as asbestos or lead or pest problems, a leaky roof. You cannot put in insulation if a roof is leaking. You're just going to create mold and make the air quality worse. So the utilities have never been able to use money to actually address these issues in the homes, and therefore they've had to walk away from all of this energy efficiency work that could be done. Of course, the homes, which are predominantly low income, also tend to be in the worst shape and have the most problems, and also have the highest energy bill. So what we've done in this new pilot is set aside a little bit of money. It's about $1.1 million per utility over the next 2 years that they can actually use to actually make these home improvements rather than walking away, and then they can make the energy efficiency improvements. So these are just a few of the examples of things that can be improved in the home through the health and safety kind of pilot, and then putting in the energy efficiency measures. And then here's a couple of case studies. This is actually a really new space. And so we're looking to, different programs around the country that have started doing these health and safety interventions along with energy efficiency. And we're seeing that they're actually helping with health outcomes as well as reducing people's energy bills. So this is another example. And then one more. And so cost of intervention, $700 per unit. This is a multifamily building. But the person who was part of the study had a COPD diagnosis. Since the intervention has had no specialty medical care, no emergency department visits, increased ability to exercise. So, while also reducing the electric costs to her home. So that's sort of the end of my slides. I do want to actually take a minute and talk about a little bit that's going on right now, just because I think it's really critical. And I think that you, as health professionals, can be really helpful in the advocacy piece. Obviously, the COVID-19 crisis has sent most people home, has cost millions of jobs. We always talk about the most vulnerable populations, and they're always the same people. Utilities right now have put a moratorium on shutoffs as long as we're in this state of emergency. Right now, they have it through April, but I think that's extending as long as we're in the state of emergency. The problem that we know we're going to face in a few months, or however long this takes, is that those utility bills are accruing at the same time. And so while there may be a moratorium right now, the question is what happens? In addition to the fact that the bills are still accruing, people are using a lot more energy at home because the whole way the grid is working has been changed by most people being at home all the time. depending on when this crisis ends, and how much those bills have accrued, we could end up facing mass shutoffs, in the middle of summer, or if it takes even longer, middle of winter. And so we're putting together some stuff, a list of policies that we're sending off to the governor, as well as the Public Service Commission, and probably a few others as well, to try and figure out some fixes through both executive order and then possibly some legislation to ensure that people do not face that when this finally ends. We're very happy the utilities are doing the moratoriums now, but we have to think long-term, and that's going to require advocacy during this time. So that's what I have. Let's get out of this if I can. Go back to
Great. Thanks, Alexis. I know folks were putting some things in the chat box, but
oh, sorry, I had the chat closed.
Oh no, that's okay. It was just a rolling thing. A lot of it was really the fact that folks are happy that we're able to focus on solutions, and that they're excited to hear that the commission told DTE that they need to go back to the drawing board with their plan. But yeah, are there other points that folks would like to make or questions that they have for Alexis? Alexis, you kind of touched on this a little bit in your presentation when you talked about transportation now being the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Are there any particular steps that are being taken right now to help address this?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly were clean fuel standards that were put in place, again, under the Obama administration that the Trump administration has tried to roll back, but mostly the auto companies are still moving in that direction because they know it's the direction it's going. So there certainly is scheduled to be a pretty big ramp up in the production of electric vehicles over the next few years. All of the auto companies have announced, some plans for that. Big thing now is basically improving the highways and the charging infrastructure so that people have, confidence in the ability to get where they need to go for long distances with an electric vehicle. So there are groups, and Charles Griffith, who's one of our colleagues, is working pretty specifically on EV policy at the local, state, and then sort of the regional level, trying to build up a corridor of charging infrastructure, also working with cities to try to get fleets changed, school districts as well, moving to electric school buses, and then with transit agencies. And I've done some of the transit agency work with Charles because I work on expansion of public transportation as well, although not this year. So yeah, there are definitely things that need to be done and are moving in that direction.
Great, thank you. And then you also kind of touched on the work that the Works for Me DTE campaign is doing. Do you have anything, like any other specifics, or Catherine, do you have anything that you want to add about that campaign and the great work that coalition's been doing?
Oh, Catherine, did you want to add something? I can cover it. Catherine's been on the ground doing a lot of work with them for quite a while. They're very grassroots, but have been incredibly successful on mobilizing community members to actually, get involved in this, pretty, like I said, wonky and boring thing that nobody thinks of, but can make a huge difference in, how policies are made. They have, for a while, their focus was predominantly on the integrated resource plan, but they were also doing some work on the rate cases. DTE had filed a rate case asking for significant rate increases last year. And they got some of what they wanted, not everything, but we were fighting that too. But they've now filed a new rate case. And so we're involved in that at the Public Service Commission as an intervener, but the Work for Me DTE is doing a lot of groundwork again, trying to generate comments and say, you can't keep increasing rates on low-income customers or on any residential customers really, while also leaving those customers most vulnerable with the worst infrastructure. So they're doing that work. I know that right now during this crisis, Work for Me DTE has switched over to some serious protection issues. They're working also on the moratorium, but also getting people turned back on who have been turned off. Especially during this kind of a crisis, you need your utilities, and that includes water. The MPSC doesn't handle water utilities. Those are all sort of individual municipal or county by county, or like Great Lakes Water Authority. So the Public Service Commission doesn't have authority over that. But we in some of our work have also partnered with those trying to take on the water utilities to make sure people are getting turned back on. It's critical. I can't hear you.
Thank you. I left myself on mute. I was just going to say, are there any other questions or comments from folks regarding Alexis's presentation or any of the other things we've talked about?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I really appreciate kind of the information about state policy and things that have been happening in Michigan. I know I, like probably so many people, had been just like heartbroken and kind of devastated to see how many federal policies have been rolled back, and to feel kind of overwhelmed and like, what power do we still have, and really appreciating all the hard work that continues to go on, in the state of Michigan, and then kind of at the more local level. I've been following the Michigan Public Service Commission, and they're wanting DTE to kind of go back to the drawing board, and just kind of individually for me felt like, oh, finally, some of our voices are being heard here. And that felt like just really exciting, and, really appreciate everyone from the Ecology Center that's put the word out. I definitely sent in a comment myself when they were looking for public feedback. So just wanting to find out more ways that I can kind of support my community in these types of actions too. So thanks so much for the info.
Yeah, and absolutely. And there will be plenty coming down the pike because, all organizing has gone online right now. So there will be lots of things to, sign on to make calls to. I mean, there are probably going to be some virtual meetings where people can make comments, and, we definitely want people to be heard.
Yeah, definitely. I think of, when just looking at the 10%, renewables for Michigan, and kind of thinking globally about the IPCC report about, needing to get to carbon neutral by 2030. And, it's just making me feel that sense of urgency, and feeling like this program itself is all the more important for us to kind of keep working together and moving forward. So so grateful you guys are here.
And I was really encouraged that you stated that the standalone energy policies can make a difference because, like Catherine just pointed out, watching what has happened in this administration, it can be super discouraging, but then seeing that there is, activation at that level really kind of helps put things into perspective. And I really like the focus on what individuals can do at their homes to become more self-reliant and save money, and, to hopefully inspire other people in their own communities. And then, like you just said, now that everything's sort of naturally moving online, maybe we can participate at a greater level, because one of the impediments obviously is trying to get to those meetings. Sometimes you find out about it a few hours before or only a day before. I can't rearrange my whole schedule just to get to some of that stuff.
Sure.
But this might be a great opportunity to jump in a little bit more meaningfully.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would love to know more about other things that are happening around the world, because I feel like given some of the political limitations that we have right now, that there are going to be people in lots of other countries who are actually leading on some of these, trying to make, or at least not miss by a lot, some of these IPCC goals, et cetera. And so
Sure.
I'm really interested in learning from other places that are moving ahead much more quickly than we are, at least at this point. So hopefully we can touch on some of those things as well.
Yeah, and I think in the 201, when we get more into, the broader climate change issue and less into sort of the, Michigan energy generation, you're going to hear more about some of that.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm not sure if this is an appropriate question, but I'm wondering, the Ecology Center itself and the programs in the Ecology Center, I imagine they try and be bipartisan or trying to avoid the appearance of certain kinds of political bias, but I'm not sure that's true. And I guess I'd like to know, in a general political sense, what the organization does, because, I went to there's been a series of climate change lectures through OLLI. I don't know, you guys are all pretty young, but OLLI's for us retired folks. The University of Michigan has an organization that organizes these lectures and classes, and they're having a climate change sequence that's really been excellent. And the guy who was the dean of the U of M School of Sustainability and Environment gave the first one. And, he was talking about all these different issues about climate change and some of the stuff you just talked about. But in the end, he said the top 5 things you can do to affect climate change for the better and these issues. The number 1 was, he said, elect someone besides Trump. And then number 2 was elect someone besides Trump. And then number 3 was elect someone besides Trump. And so it was like the top 4 or 5 before he got to the smaller, I don't mean to say these are not significant issues, but the sort of, changing these sorts of things. And so
Right.
I'm wondering what the place of sort of general political activity and advocacy is within this framework that we're working here.
Sure. I mean, I try not to go, we are a nonpartisan organization. We cannot, by law, participate in anything partisan. That doesn't mean that I don't criticize, administrations, be they Democrat or Republican, for some of the actions they do or do not take. So obviously you've heard me criticize the Trump administration for rolling back a whole bunch of stuff. That being said, at the state level, we have built some pretty good coalitions on some of these, energy policies that are definitely bipartisan. We also are part of a broad coalition called Michigan Energy, Michigan Jobs, where it's, a pretty big group of folks working together, and we have, the environmental organization, some of the energy contractor associate groups. We have a conservative energy forum. The Christian Coalition is part of the MEMJ. We also have Blue Green Alliance, which brings together environment and labor. And we have, throughout the last several years, developed strategies together to try and push these things forward. I am not the best messenger to go into, a Republican from Northern Michigan. I'm from an environmental nonprofit in Ann Arbor. They're going to laugh me out of the room. I might as well say I'm from California. But through this coalition, we've developed these strategies where, so I may not be the one to go in, but the Christian Coalition can, or the Conservative Energy Forum, and we actually work to, contour our messages to sort of the audience that we're trying to reach, or the legislator we're trying to reach. As far as, specific political activity, we as an organization, like I said, can't do anything partisan, but we certainly have engaged on ballot proposals. We, under IRS law can do that. I've run a couple campaigns to try and expand public transit in the Ann Arbor area, and part of the urban core of Washtenaw County. I worked on the 2016 regional transit campaign. We engaged pretty heavily in the move last year to get rid of gerrymandering. So there are, and we certainly can do get out the vote efforts, and we do that. So there is
Okay,
quite a bit of political activity. But yes, elections matter.
All right. Anything else for Alexis? All right. Well, thanks again, Alexis.